They say money can't buy happiness. But the terrifying truth that no one talks about is this: money can't buy safety either. We look at celebrities, and we see the private jets, the gated communities, the bodyguards. We assume they have unlocked a cheat code to life, a level of protection that the rest of us can only dream of. We think tragedy is a poor man's problem. But we are wrong. There is a specific kind of nightmare that only the famous know. It is the nightmare of standing over a casket while the world watches. It is the nightmare of having millions of dollars in the bank, but needing a miracle that costs nothing and realizing you cannot buy it. When death comes for the children of the famous, it doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door down. Just look at the man who was once called America's dad. In 1997, Bill Cosby was an institution. He was untouchable. But at 1:00 a.m. on a dark freeway in Los Angeles, his empire meant nothing. His only son, Ennis Cosby, pulled his Mercedes-Benz over to fix a flat tire. It was a mundane inconvenience. It shouldn't have been fatal. But a random stranger with a gun didn't care whose son he was. One shot. That was all it took. The heir to a dynasty was left dying on the side of the road over a piece of rubber. Or look at the Lee family, a name synonymous with strength. Bruce Lee was the fittest man alive, yet he died mysteriously in his prime. But the curse didn't stop there. Years later, his son, Brandon Lee, was on the verge of superstardom. He was on a movie set, a controlled environment, a place of make-believe. But the gun was real. The bullet was real. And the tragedy was real. These aren't just headlines. These are reminders that the Grim Reaper does not check your net worth. Tonight, we are peeling back the curtain. This is not about the red carpets. This is about the graveyards. We are going to explore the stories of the celebrities who had to face the ultimate test, burying the people they loved the most. From murder to suicide, from mental illness to the quiet killers of addiction. And to understand how deep this pain goes, we have to start with a family that seemed cursed from the very beginning. If you think you know the story of R&B legend Bobby Womack, think again. His life wasn't just a struggle, it was a Shakespearean tragedy written in blood. Bobby Womack was a man who sang about pain because he lived in it. And the first domino to fall was his own brother Harry Womack. It was March 9th, 1974. Harry was a talented musician, a backup singer for Bobby, and he was staying at Bobby's apartment while Bobby was away on tour. Harry thought he was safe. He was in his brother's home. But he made one fatal mistake. He let his girlfriend come over. While she was in the apartment, she found something that triggered a blind, jealous rage, a set of woman's clothing. Now, here is the cruel twist of fate. The clothes didn't belong to Harry's lover. They belonged to Bobby's girlfriend. Harry was innocent. But in that moment of heated fury, truth didn't matter. She didn't ask for an explanation. She marched into the kitchen, grabbed a steak knife, and stabbed Harry in the neck. When the paramedics arrived, the knife was still there. Harry bled to death on his brother's floor, a victim of a misunderstanding that shouldn't have cost a life. When Bobby found out, the guilt nearly destroyed him. He kept thinking, if I hadn't left those clothes there, if I had just taken him on tour with me. He poured that agony into the hit song, Harry Hippie. But a platinum record can't replace a brother. And the most terrifying part. This was just the first funeral Bobby Womack would have to attend. The curse was just getting started. If the death of his brother was the opening act of a tragedy, what followed was a descent into hell that few could survive. To understand the curse that plagued Bobby Womack, you have to look at the tangled web of his personal life, in a move that shocked the world. Bobby married Barbara Cook, the widow of his mentor, the legendary Sam Cooke, just months after Sam was murdered. It was a scandal that shook the music industry, but inside that marriage, a dark cloud was already forming. Sam and Barbara had previously lost a son to a drowning accident years prior. History, cruel as it is, seemed determined to circle back around. Bobby and Barbara had a son together. They named him Vincent. Imagine the weight on that child's shoulders. He was growing up in the shadow of two giants, the ghost of Sam Cooke and the chaotic genius of Bobby Womack. That kind of pressure can crush a person before they even have a chance to grow. Vincent struggled. He fought with depression. He fought with the expectations of his last name. The fame and the money didn't bring him peace. They brought him isolation. In 1986, at just 21 years old, the age when life is supposed to truly begin, Vincent Womack took his own life with a single gunshot to the head. Another casket. Another Womack buried before his time. But the moment that truly broke Bobby, the moment that haunts every parent's worst nightmare, happened in 1978. By this time, Bobby had remarried. He and his new wife, Regina, had a beautiful baby boy named Truth Womack. He was named by the funk legend Sly Stone. Truth was only 4 months old. One night, Bobby came home late from the studio. It was around 2 or 3 hours in the morning. He was buzzing with creative energy. He had just laid down some new tracks on his guitar, and he was desperate to share them with his wife. Regina was anxious. She kept trying to go back to the bedroom to check on baby Truth. She knew her son was an active sleeper, one of those babies who moved around and crawled even while dreaming. She had a mother's intuition that she needed to watch him. But Bobby, wanting a moment of connection with his wife, told her to stop worrying. He poured her a glass of wine. He told her to relax. "Let me play you this song," he insisted. "We can check on him in a minute." That decision, that single innocent desire to share a song, would cost him everything. When Bobby finally walked into the bedroom, the silence was heavy. The baby wasn't in his spot on the bed. Truth had crawled in his sleep. He had slipped into the narrow, suffocating gap between the mattress and the wall. Because there was no headboard to stop him, he fell into the space, trapped against the bedding, unable to cry out, unable to breathe. Bobby Womack found his 4-month-old son lifeless. The guilt was instantaneous and crushing. He blamed himself entirely. If he hadn't poured that wine, if he hadn't played that song, if he had just listened to his wife, the marriage didn't survive. Bobby moved out of the house, unable to look at the walls that witnessed the tragedy. A brother stabbed, a son by suicide, an infant by suffocation. Bobby Womack spent the rest of his life singing with a pain that felt ancient because he was carrying the ghosts of an entire family tree. But Bobby wasn't the only father to lose a child to the shadows. Decades later, another icon, a man known for his smile on daytime TV, would face a similar darkness. Dara, toi se guigno u kone, duide la lan viet thra kukit ban. So tu saundra dinentuitu. Part 3. Of a broken heart, sometimes death doesn't come from a bullet or an accident. Sometimes it comes from the inside. There are fathers and mothers who, for all intents and purposes, died the moment they had to bury their child, even if their bodies kept breathing for a few more years. We have to talk about Christophe St. John. To millions of fans, he was the handsome, charming Neil Winters on the soap opera, The Young and the Restless. On screen, he lived a life of scripted drama where every problem could be solved in an episode. But in reality, he was fighting a desperate losing battle to save his son, Julian St. John. Julian wasn't just a celebrity kid living off his father's fame. He was a talented artist, a young man with a soul, but he had been fighting demons since he was a child. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia at the age of 18. He heard voices. He struggled with severe bouts of depression. There were times he even chose homelessness over the comfort of his family's wealth because the noise in his head was too loud to bear. On November 23, 2014, the call came. Julian was found dead in a mental health facility in Long Beach. He had taken his own life. But the tragedy wasn't just that he died. It was how preventable it seemed. His parents, Christoph, and his ex-wife, boxer, Mia St. John, filed a lawsuit that exposed a heartbreaking reality of negligence. They argued that the facility failed their son. Julian was supposed to be on suicide watch, checked every 15 minutes. But security footage revealed that on the day of his death, he was left alone for over an hour. Even worse, the staff had allegedly falsified records to make it look like they checked on him. He used a plastic bag to end his life, an item that should never have been in his possession in a high-risk ward. Christoph St. John was shattered. He never recovered. You could see the light leave his eyes in every interview after that. He fell into a deep depression. He drank to numb the pain. And then 5 years later, on February 3, 2019, Christoph passed away. The official cause was hypertrophic heart failure. But his ex-wife, Mia, and his fans knew the real truth. He died of a broken heart. He simply wanted to be with his son. This story of a father's grief echoes in the life of one of Hollywood's toughest men, Sylvester Stallone. We know Stallone as the unstoppable force. Rocky Balboa, Rambo, the man who never stays down. But on July 13, 2012, Sylvester Stallone faced the one opponent he couldn't beat: the death of his eldest son, Sage Stallone. If you watched Rocky V, you remember the kid who played Rocky's son on screen. That was Sage. They weren't just acting. That bond was real blood. Sage was found dead at his home in Los Angeles. He had been dead for several days before his housekeeper discovered him. At first, the media went into a frenzy. They found empty bottles of prescription pills in his room. The headline screamed overdose. Just weeks prior, Sage had undergone extensive dental surgery, having 5 teeth pulled at once against his mother's pleading. The speculation was that he got hooked on painkillers. The world wanted a scandal. But the autopsy revealed a quieter, sadder truth. Sage didn't die from drugs. He died from a heart attack caused by atherosclerosis. He had coronary heart disease at just 36 years old. The image of Sylvester Stallone, the symbol of physical strength, having to bury his firstborn son, is a reminder that no amount of muscle can protect you from the fragility of life. Stallone later said, "When a parent loses a child, there is no greater pain." And looking at him, the man who defeated Apollo Creed and Ivan Drago, you could see that this was the one hit he would never fully heal from. But grief affects everyone differently. While some fathers fade away, some families turn their grief into public spectacle, raising uncomfortable questions about how we mourn in the modern age. Here is part 4 of 7. Focus, the weight of a legacy, and the reality TV dilemma. Word count 665 words. Part 4. The pressure cooker and the camera lens. The list of grieving fighters continues, and it brings us to another giant of the ring, George Foreman. We know George as the lovable icon selling grills, or the fearsome heavyweight who rumbled in the jungle. But he is also a father who had to bury a daughter. Frida Foreman was born into a legacy that is almost impossible to live up to. When your father is one of the toughest men on the planet, the shadow he casts is enormous. Frida tried to step into that light. She became a professional boxer herself. She put on the gloves. She stepped into the ring. She won fights. She wanted to prove that the foreman blood ran through her veins. But the fight outside the ring is often harder than the one inside it. On March 9, 2019, Frida was found dead in her home near Houston, Texas. She was 42 years old. The cause of death was suicide by hanging. It left the world stunned. Was it the pressure of the name? Was it the silent toll of depression? Or was it something darker? Some reports questioned if the brain damage sustained from her boxing career contributed to her mental state. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, is a ghost that haunts many fighters. We may never know the full answer. We only know that George Foreman, a man who could knock out the strongest opponents in history, was powerless to stop the silent battle his daughter was fighting in her own mind. But while George Foreman mourned privately, a new phenomenon has emerged in the last decade: the televised tragedy. This brings us to the heartbreaking story of Toya Wright, the reality TV star and ex-wife of rap superstar Lil Wayne. Toya lives her life in front of the cameras. But on July 31, 2016, her reality show ceased to be entertainment and became a horror movie. Toya received the call that no sister ever wants to get. Her two brothers, Rudy and Josh Johnson, were both shot and killed inside a car in New Orleans. Now, usually when we hear about violence in New Orleans involving young men, people assume it's a drug deal gone wrong or a complex gang war. But the reason for this double murder was so trivial, so senseless, it makes you sick to your stomach. According to witnesses, the entire altercation started over a door. A man named Antoine Edwards was angry. Why? Because Rudy and Josh had come to a trap house through the front door instead of the back door to buy marijuana. That was it. That was the infraction. An argument over etiquette at a drug house escalated, egos flared, and a gun was drawn. Rudy was 24. Josh was 30. Two young men wiped off the face of the earth because they walked through the wrong entrance. But the tragedy didn't end with the funeral. It continued in the court of public opinion. Toya Wright made the decision to include her brother's funeral and her grieving process on her reality show. The backlash was immediate and vicious. The internet accused her of trauma porn. People said she was exploiting her own family's blood for ratings. They asked, "Is nothing sacred anymore?" But Toya fired back with a sobering truth. "This is my reality." She raised a point that divides audiences today. If you sign up to show your life to the world, do you get to hide the ugly parts? Or do you owe the audience your pain just as much as your joy? Toya argued that by showing the funeral, she was showing the real cost of gun violence in New Orleans. She wasn't just crying for the camera. She was crying for a generation of young men being killed over nothing. It's a debate with no easy answer, but it proves that in the modern age, the curse of fame has evolved. It's not just about the tragedy itself anymore. It's about the millions of strangers judging how you survive that tragedy. And speaking of senseless violence, our next stories prove that you don't even have to be involved in the streets to become a victim of them. Sometimes, you are just in the wrong place at the wrong time. There is a dangerous misconception that fame buys safety. We think that once you make it out of the hood, once you get the money and the TV shows, you and your family are untouchable. But the streets don't care who your grandmother is. A bullet doesn't check your pedigree before it strikes. Sometimes you don't have to be involved in a crime to become a victim of one. Sometimes you are just walking down the street. Take the story of Mona Little. Her name carries weight in music history because she was the granddaughter of the late, great David Ruffin, the lead singer of The Temptations. She had Motown royalty in her blood. She was supposed to carry that legacy forward. But on January 28, 2007, pedigree didn't matter. Mona was walking with 3 friends in Detroit. It was a regular day. A black Ford Crown Victoria pulled up alongside them. The window rolled down. Shots rang out. Police investigations later revealed that Mona wasn't even the target. She hadn't done anything to anyone. She was just there. She was the only one hit. At 19 years old, the granddaughter of a legend was left dying on the pavement in a drive-by shooting. To this day, the murder remains unsolved. No justice. Just a family left wondering, why her? The randomness of violence is what makes it so terrifying. It doesn't follow a schedule. It can happen on a random Tuesday, or it can happen on the holiest day of the year. Patrick Parker was the son of the soul legend, Betty Wright. Betty was the woman who sang "Clean Up Woman" and "No Pain, No Gain." She sang about heartbreak with a power that few could match. But in 2000, she experienced a heartbreak that no song could ever capture. It was December 25th, Christmas Day. While families across the world were opening gifts and eating dinner, Patrick was at a holiday party in South Florida. A fight broke out. It wasn't Patrick's fight. He wasn't a troublemaker. But when guns are drawn in a crowded room, innocence offers no protection. Patrick was shot and killed. He was 21 years old. The details of how Betty found out are cinematic in their tragedy. At the time of the shooting, Betty Wright was working. She was performing on a cruise ship, bringing joy to vacationers. When she got the news, her world collapsed. She had to charter a helicopter to fly back to Miami immediately. Imagine that flight. Hovering over the ocean, the noise of the rotors drowning out your thoughts, knowing your son is gone, while the rest of the world celebrates Christmas below you. Betty Wright spent her life singing about pain, but this was a pain she never rehearsed for. And finally, in this chapter of senseless loss, we have Miracle Rogers. She was the daughter of Wanda Rogers from the famous Motown group, the Marvelettes. In February 2015, Miracle and her best friend were found shot to death inside a home in Cincinnati. It was 1:30 in the morning. Neighbors heard 4 shots. Police arrived to find a gruesome scene. Detectives stated they believed it wasn't a random robbery. They said the victims likely knew the killer, but they never elaborated on why. Miracle was 32 years old. She had been adopted and raised by her aunt, trying to build a life for herself. She left behind 3 children, who now have to grow up wondering why their mother was taken. These stories prove a brutal truth. You can have a famous last name. You can have a parent who is a global icon. But when you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, fame cannot stop the bleeding. They didn't die because they were stars. They died because they were human, living in a world where life is often treated as cheap. But if violence is the loud enemy, our next chapter deals with the silent assassin, the one that creeps into the mansions of the wealthy and steals the next generation before they even have a chance to shine. De La Fond 6. Trên 37 của kịch bản. Chủ đề cơn ác mộng của các huyền thoại hip-hop Dr. Dre and gia đình Troutman. Sơ từ 680 từ, Part 6. The Silent Assassin and the Generational Curse. If violence is the loud enemy of the famous, then addiction is the silent assassin. It creeps into the mansions, into the tour buses, and sadly, into the lives of the next generation. We are seeing a terrifying new wave of tragedy, where the children of legends are succumbing to the same vices that plagued the music industry for decades, specifically the opioid crisis. We have to talk about Dr. Dre. He is arguably the most successful producer in hip-hop history. He built empires. He made billionaires. He gave the world NWA Snoop Dogg, Eminem, and 50 Cent. But he could not build a wall high enough to keep death out of his family. On August 23, 2008, Dr. Dre's son, Andre Young Jr. had been out with friends the night before. He came home, went to bed, and simply never woke up. His mother found him in his bed around 10:00 a.m. He was unresponsive. The coroner's report was devastating. He died from an overdose of heroin and morphine. He was only 20 years old. For Dr. Dre, this loss was a reopening of an old deep wound. Decades prior, on June 24th, 1989, Dre lost his younger brother Tyree. The story is heartbreaking. Tyree had gotten into a verbal altercation that turned physical. During the fight, a man slammed Tyree onto the ground, breaking his neck. He died from his injuries. At that time, NWA was on top of the world. Dre was on tour. For years, he blamed himself because Tyree had begged to come on tour with him. Dre had said no, thinking he was keeping him safe at home, away from the chaos of the road. He thought if Tyree had been on the bus, he would still be alive. To lose a brother to violence, and then decades later lose a son to drugs. It is a level of tragedy that no amount of platinum records or headphone sales can heal. The curse of lost potential also haunts the legacy of the Troutman family. We all know Roger Troutman, the genius behind Zapp and the master of the talkbox. But the tragedy that follows his bloodline is unrelenting. On January 1st, 2020, New Year's Day, the world lost a bright rising star, Lexi Aaliyah. Lexi was Roger Troutman's granddaughter. She wasn't just famous by association, she was a legitimate talent. She had a huge following on SoundCloud. She was collaborating with singers like Kalani, and she had performed at major festivals. She was supposed to be the next big female rapper. She was found unconscious at a hotel in Minneapolis. Bystanders tried to perform CPR, but it was too late. The cause of death was an accidental overdose of fentanyl and alcohol. The tragedy is in the details. She had just posted on social media that she was staying in the crib for New Year's to be safe. She wasn't partying recklessly. She was trying to be responsible. But in the age of fentanyl, one mistake, one tainted substance is all it takes. She was 21 years old, but she wasn't the first in the family to face a tragic end. Her father, Robert Lynch, also known as Little Roger, was the oldest son of Roger Troutman. He was being groomed to take over the Zapp legacy. He released a solo album in the New Jack Swing era and played keyboards for the band, mint condition. But in January 2003, Little Roger died after spending months in a coma. The circumstances are still murky. Reports say he was found unconscious with a severe head injury. His head was essentially caved in. Some say it was an accident. Friends and family believe it was a brutal assault that was never solved. He was 33 years old. 2 generations of Troutmans, a father and a daughter. Both talented, both carrying a legendary name, and both gone before they could fully realize their gifts. But perhaps the most controversial story of grief and the most haunting repetition of history was yet to come. Here is part 7 of 7, the final chapter. Focus: the final tragedy. History repeating and the conclusion. Word count 710 words. Part 7, the unfinished story and the final echo. And finally, we reach the stories that feel less like accidents and more like haunting prophecies. We have to talk about Lauren Braxton. Lauren was the niece of Tony and Tamar Braxton. She was part of a family dynasty that dominated R&B reality TV. But on April 29, 2019, Lauren was found unresponsive on her kitchen floor. A witness had just been talking to her 10 minutes earlier. By the time paramedics arrived, she was gone. The cause was a lethal combination of heroin and fentanyl intoxication. She was 2 years old. Lauren's death sparked a different kind of controversy, one that exposed the ugly side of modern fame. Tamar Braxton, her famous aunt, went live on Instagram and announced she would not be attending the funeral. Her reasoning: she said she was too drained from touring and filming Braxton family values. She said it was the first time she had lost a family member, and she chose to protect her mental health rather than perform sadness for a crowd. The internet was furious. They called her selfish. They said she put her career over her family. But Tamar's reaction reveals a harsh truth about the curse of fame. When you live your life under a lens, even your grief is judged. The pressure to mourn correctly can be just as overwhelming as the loss itself. But there is one story that stands above them all as the ultimate example of history repeating itself. It is the story that shook the world, not because it was unexpected, but because it felt like a mirror image of a nightmare we had already seen. We have to talk about Bobbi Kristina Brown. She was the only child of Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown. She was born into music royalty. She was the heiress to a voice that defined a generation. But she also inherited the chaos. She grew up in the crossfire of addiction public scandals and a marriage that was falling apart on the covers of tabloids. When Whitney Houston died in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton in 2012, the world mourned a legend. But Bobbi Kristina didn't just mourn. She was destroyed. She was 18 years old. She had lost her anchor. In the years that followed, Bobbi Kristina's life began to spiral. She got engaged to Nick Gordon, a man whom Whitney had taken in as a child and raised like a son. To the public, it was confusing. To the family, it was terrifying. Bobby Brown was famously against the relationship, sensing danger. But on January 31st, 2015, the nightmare scenario happened. Bobbi Kristina was found unresponsive in a bathtub at her home in Georgia. The details were chillingly similar to her mother's death. Face down in the water, drugs in her system. The eerie silence of a bathroom that had become a tomb. It was as if the script had been written years ago, and she was forced to play the final scene. Bobbi Kristina didn't die immediately. She fought. She spent nearly 6 months in a medically induced coma. Her family prayed for a miracle. Bobby Brown stood by her side, holding on to hope that his daughter would open her eyes. But the damage was too severe. On July 26, 2015, Bobbi Kristina Brown passed away. She was 22 years old. She was buried next to her mother in New Jersey. In death, they were reunited, but the cost was 2 generations of talent extinguished by the same demons. Conclusion: the great equalizer. So what do we learn from this list? We started this journey talking about the illusion of perfection. We look at celebrities and we see the cars, the jewelry, the mansions. We think they have the cheat code to life. But as we have seen from the stabbing of Harry Womack to the overdose of Dr. Dre's son, from the suicide of Julian Saint, John to the tragic accident of Sage Stallone. Wealth is not a shield. The curse of fame isn't about ghosts or superstition. It is about the very human reality that pain does not discriminate. Grief does not check your bank account. And when the Reaper comes, he doesn't care if your name is on a marquee or on a tombstone. These stories are a reminder to hold your loved ones close. Because at the end of the day, we are all just people trying to survive the tragedy of being alive. Rest in peace to all the souls we mentioned today. May they find the peace in death that life could not give them.